This is crazy, man.
Must contain itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself. So R contains itself.
All right. All right, so it says, yeah, so what's the set R? Like, R is the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. So that don't contain themselves. So R is just a bunch of kind of like normal sets. So R is just like, it's just like the empty set. It's like the set containing like one. It's a set. It's like, I don't know. It's like 1, 2. It's like ABC. It's like all these kind of like normal sets. And just kind of keeps going. So R is the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. Okay, that's cool. So what's the problem?
If and only if well, then it must contain themselves. Problem. What about R, the set of all sets that don't contain themselves? If R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself.
Wait, why? I'm watching a video on Russell's paradox, and it's giving this set R, which is the set of all sets the set of all sets which don't contain themselves. And it goes on to say, oh, if R doesn't contain itself, then it does contain itself. And I'm not understanding how that leap is made.
Russell's paradox is indeed a tricky concept. The set R is defined as the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. If R does not contain itself, then it must satisfy its own definition, and therefore must contain itself. Conversely, if R does contain itself, it contradicts its definition and thus cannot contain itself. This creates a logical contradiction or paradox. Does that help clarify it?
No. X is a set and X is not in X. Okay. Does R contain itself? Is R a member of R? No, I would start with case 2 because like we defined it this way. R does not contain it. Well, okay, I guess we didn't say that R doesn't necessarily contain itself. We just said it's the set of all sets which don't contain themselves. So what's a set where it contains itself? So let S be a set, and we'll say such that S is a member of S. can write that down. It doesn't really like make sense, but you can write it down. Let S be a set such that S is in S. Doesn't make sense, but okay. So let R be the set. I mean, they kind of wrote it, ChatGPT wrote it down. The set X such that X is not, all the sets X such that X is not in X. Okay, so yeah, so R is the set of all. It just contains a bunch of normal sets. Now we're considering R, and we're saying, does R contain itself? Yes or no? Basically, we have a yes/no answer here. Okay, if R does contain itself, by the definition of R, it contains only sets that do not contain themselves. Yeah. Oh, dang. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, cool. So R is in R. So therefore, R doesn't contain itself. Okay. So it's like, yeah. So suppose that R does contain itself. So it's kind of like R is equal to this big set where, you know, you got all these whatever sets, and then you got R, and then you got, you know, this thing. So, but by the definition of R, so if R is in R, then like this set here can't contain itself, but these two things are the same set. So, yeah, it's a contradiction. It's kind of like, so suppose then you have kind of like this kind of situation here. Well, since R is in R, since R is a member of R, what do we know about this set? We know that the set R does not contain itself. So you kind of like look at this and you're like, okay, R doesn't contain itself. And then you look at this and you're like, wait, R does contain itself. So you kind of like look at these two and like this can't hold. These are two contradictory things. It's over. So because we supposed this, we kind of like arrived at this situation. So we kind of backtrack and say, okay, this supposition must have been wrong. So cool. Then we say, then suppose R is not in R. So that's cool. You know, R is just like whatever. That's that whole giant set of kind of like normal looking sets. So now what's the problem? R doesn't contain itself, which is exactly the condition for membership in R. That R does not contain itself, which is exactly the condition for membership in R. Huh. Okay. So R is the set here, and it doesn't contain itself. Equal to the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. Well, R is a set that doesn't contain itself. R is a set that doesn't contain itself. R is the set of all. R is okay. No, it's R is the set of all sets that contain themselves. Hence, R is in R. Like R should be in R. I think this is the kind of contradiction right here. So it's kind of like we suppose that R is not in R. Since R is the set of all sets that don't contain themselves, then R is in R. But kind of looking at these two, and then R should be in R. And see why not. Hence, you basically have this situation. It should be that R is equal to R. But you have this kind of thing right here. Yeah, this is kind of a nice contradictory. This looks kind of like nice and contradictory right here to me. So it's like we suppose R is not in R. Since R is the set of all sets that don't contain themselves, then R should contain R. Then this set should contain R. Like R is equal to like this right here. But you have this contradiction right here. But you have the... Okay, so now we have, it's almost kind of like a loop. It's kind of like this going like around and around kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm understanding that. So in the case of, we kind of like suppose R is not a member of R. And then kind of we like do some steps, and then we get basically like R is equal to so we kind of get this kind of like loop thing here. I don't know why I want to draw it like a loop. It's not really looping back, but That's wrong. And why did we assume this in the first place? We said so we just posited this existence of R. So what? So R can't exist. So what? R can't exist? Is that the conclusion of this? Like we posited can lead to contradictions. So what's the result of this? It seems that we posited the existence of a set R, which is just kind of, I don't know, it's nonsensical. Like you can't actually construct R. It's like it seems like what happened was we posited the existence of this set R, and we reached a contradiction. So shouldn't the conclusion be that like R just can't exist? I don't quite see what the problem is and why this is like a fatal flaw with set theory or something.
You're right on track. The key takeaway from Russell's paradox is exactly that. The set R, as defined, cannot exist within the framework of naive set theory. Here's why this is a big deal. Naive set theory, the idea was that you could define any set by any property. It seemed intuitive. If you can describe a condition, you can form a set. Russell's paradox, it showed that this assumption leads to contradictions. If you could freely form sets based on any condition, you end up with nonsensible entities like R. Reforming set theory, to avoid such paradoxes, mathematicians developed more rigorous foundations like Zermelo-Fraenkel ZF set theory, which includes rules to prevent such contradictions. So the fatal flaw was in the unrestricted way sets were defined. Russell's paradox highlighted the need for a more careful approach, which led to more consistent systems in mathematics. Does that clarify why this is so significant?
Maybe.
But if R does the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. If R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself.
If R doesn't contain itself, if R does, well, yeah, he's like doing like a lot of heavy lifting with that like one if then. Like it's not obvious that this should follow. So he says, suppose R doesn't contain itself. Well, suppose R doesn't contain itself. Then it should be in R. It's weird to say like, oh, if it doesn't contain itself, then it does contain itself. Like that's just like a weird way to say it. You should say, okay, suppose R doesn't contain itself. Then since R then R should be a member of itself. Then R should be a member of itself. Then R should be in itself, in the set.
But if R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself.
Then it, okay, fine. Then it must contain itself. Like, yeah, okay. Then it should. Yeah, that's not a bad way to say it. I'm saying it should contain itself, but then it must contain itself. That's better than saying like then it does contain itself. Then it must. It's actually a pretty good way to say it.
But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself.
It must not. Then if
Itself. But if R does contain itself, then
okay, so then, well, yeah, I mean, then it just like very directly violates like the way that we set up R. That's kind of dumb. It's like it's kind of saying like that, like suppose R is in R. So like hence R is equal to, you know, blah, 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 R. But by the way that we defined R, this is in contradiction with, you know, the way that we
by definition, it must not contain itself. So R contains itself if and only it must, well, then it must contain itself. If R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself.
I don't know if I like that must language going the opposite direction. So then let's just say, yeah, let's say that R contains itself. I don't think that's like a good way to say when it goes. I don't think we should say must. We should say, okay, suppose R contains itself. Then, you know, R is equal to a set that looks like this. But this is in conflict or contradiction with the way that we defined R in the same place. I don't think saying like, then it must not contain it, then it must not. You might say, but R must not contain itself.
Itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself. Itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself.
Then it must not. Yeah, I don't like the then. I don't like the then there. Should say, okay, suppose R contains itself. Then R is a set that looks like this, but that can't be.
Contain itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself.
It's almost like he's saying that, okay, suppose this. Then, you know, is almost kind of like deriving like a new fact from this. But he's kind of saying then, you know, but like then referring back to a previous thing. It's making it seem like there's like a new thing derived from this, but he's actually just referring back to like a previous like fact. So you say, suppose R looks like this. Suppose R is in R. Then, you know, whatever. Then R has this form. But, you know, so we suppose, you know, R is in R. Then R looks like this. But, you know, look back, call back to this. And whatever, contradiction. Versus, okay, let's suppose that R is not in R. And so how did that work again? So we said, so suppose that R is not in R. Okay, so yeah, it's okay. So it's suppose R is not an R. Then R should be in R. Almost like all right, it's like suppose R is not in R. Then should be R is equal to should have this case here. But call back to the previous thing. So suppose R is in R, then you have this, but okay. So let's do so suppose R is in R, then R looks like this. Let R be the set that blah blah blah. Then R is going to be like this. Suppose R is in R. Then, but hence, okay, then suppose R is not in R. Then it should be that R is equal to by definition of R. But, and then call back to the, let R be the set that blah, blah, blah. Is there any, in this branch, you have this kind of should be thing. I think this feels most natural. Over here, it's more of like a direct like then kind of thing. So suppose that R is in R, then then like R looks like this. It's kind of like this local thing. Okay, it's this local thing because it's derived from like the very preceding fact, I guess. But this is in contradiction with this thing before. This thing, hence. So then suppose R is not an R. Then it should be that, yeah, because we're kind of like reaching back to this thing like right here. We're not like doing a direct little fucking what do you call this? Like conclusion from this? Kind of like reaching back. So that's kind of interesting. It's kind of like it's like a dependency thing. So we say like let R be the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. It's kind of like number one. Suppose R is in R, then R is equal to but so it's kind of like, all right, like this has a dependency here, but yeah, it's kind of two things. It's like this and this. There you go, hence contradiction. So over here, it's like, let R be the set of all sets that don't contain themselves. Then we say, suppose R is not in R, then, okay, instead of using the should, then we say that R basically should be like this. And that's from this. The difference here is we're just using the previous thing. Then yeah, I mean, I guess that's the difference. It's like when you do a callback thing to like multiple steps, then it's kind of like it's a should versus like a strict if then should be R is equal to but oh, why does this keep happening? And yeah, just interesting how this like should language makes a lot more sense when you kind of go like back further in time than just kind of like a direct kind of following if then, a direct deduction. You just deduce this from like the previous step. It's kind of like, yeah, just like one foot in front of the other, like you just deduce it versus you kind of see something here and then you're like, oh, that based on this thing that I remember from like a long time ago, this should be the case. Interesting. Yeah.
So R does contain itself, all sets that don't contain themselves. If R doesn't contain itself, well, then it must contain itself. But if R does contain itself, then by definition, it must not contain itself. So
then it shouldn't contain itself. Then it shouldn't contain itself.
Contains itself and only it doesn't. So R contains itself if and only if it doesn't.
Then then R contains itself. Yeah, I don't know how that's ultimately concluded, but whatever. I'm not as interested in that right now.
Russell had found another paradox of self-reference, and he later explained his paradox using a hairy analogy. Let's say there's a village populated entirely by grown men with a strange law against beards. Specifically, the law states that the village barber must shave all and only those men of the village who do not shave themselves. But the barber himself lives in the village too, of course, and he's a man, so who shaves him? If he doesn't shave himself, then the barber has to shave him. But the barber can't shave himself because the barber doesn't shave anyone who shaves themselves. So the barber must shave himself if and only if he doesn't shave himself. It's a contradiction. The intuitionists rejoiced at Russell's paradox.
Cool, guys. Yeah, I enjoyed that. That was good.
Contain it.
I'm gonna peace out for now. Peace.